Okay, hi. Happy New Year, everyone. Today I want to talk about Comedy Bang Bang, and I have a lot of things to say about Comedy Bang Bang. If you watch this channel, you know that I have kind of complicated relationship with improv. I worked at an improv theater for a while and didn't have the best time, and I was always on the stand-up side of things. I think I was pretty judgmental towards improv, and it just kind of wasn't my bag. You can watch me rant about the kind of stand-up versus improv fight that doesn't exist, and if it does, shouldn't. I never really liked improv, so knowing that, how on earth did an improv-based podcast become my all-time favorite podcast? How did it become my favorite podcast and something that just continues to blow me away? Today we're going to talk about Comedy Bang Bang, what it does differently, how it's unique, how its format is set up, and how it continues to be this amazing source of light in the LA comedy scene, what it does for the community, and how it has continued and grown into this huge enterprise monster thing. It's a pretty magical podcast, so let's do this. First and foremost, I have to kind of tell you my Comedy Bang Bang origin story. For whatever that's worth. I did not like it at all for years. So, but not for the reasons that you would think. When I was in high school, I really loved stand-up. I still do. And I became really obsessed with Patton Oswalt. And I was really excited to learn everything I could about him. And so I literally just blindly downloaded every episode of any pod he was a guest on. Whatever. I was just like, feed me, basically. And Comedy Bang Bang was on that list, so I listened to an episode having no idea what it was. And I wanted an interview of Patton Oswalt. I didn't want all of the crap. So once the characters came on after Patton, and I'll explain what I mean later, I was just like, I turned it off, I didn't like it. I was like, oh, I wanted a real interview. So I just was totally misguided about what the show was going to be. I have to get that out of the way. And it was like years later until I got back on and realized everything that I'd been missing. So number 2, let's talk about the show and what it is. It is a very unique format. I was talking with some friends of mine who are comedians, and we couldn't really think of anything else that shares this format.
I'm the host, Scott, and I have entertainers on, and I talk to these people for a bit, and they are themselves, and then I have comedians on who are playing characters. They're playing fake people, or they're doing impressions of real people.
So you sort of have this mix of real people and of characters, and I think that's part of how the show really succeeds, is it's so much more grounded than a lot of improv, and it's that chaos that can be a little bit overwhelming if you're just watching improv and you're like, what is even going on? Comedy Bang does a good job of still being super silly, but keeping it grounded in the reality of that kind of talk show format. So if you're a little scared of improv that's too zany or like just pure chaos, this might be a good entry point. I'm not trying to say it's not chaotic, because it definitely is at some points, but it's a better type of chaos, I'd say. It's interesting because the format sort of is one of the oldest tricks in the book when it comes to performing comedy, that comedian and straight man mix. Scott often just plays the straight man, and he lets his comedians go wild, and it makes me think of old vaudeville performances sometimes. It has a huge fan base, and I think part of the reason is that podcasts do get into your soul a little bit more than other types of media, because it's not something that you turn on for an hour a week. These people are in your head while you're at work, if you have a job that you can listen to podcasts during, but some people, it's just in their heads all day long, and so it creates this real sense of camaraderie and this parasocial relationship that can be incredibly strong. The show is not exactly one-sided improv, because of course Scott is pushing and asking questions and leading the people doing the characters along. And sometimes he is more bound to the yes and of it all, and then he becomes a character himself, especially if it's a character that has an established relationship with him. Some people will come on and just be random characters, but some people will come on and they'll be playing Scott's nephew, or they'll be playing Scott's stepfather, that sort of thing. So he has to be kind of dragged into that universe, and then because of the rules of improv, he can get a little wild himself in terms of his own character and his self. Yeah. Okay, number 3, let's talk just about the history of the show a little bit. It just celebrated last year its 10th anniversary, which is wild for a podcast. I mean, podcasting 10 years ago was barely a thing. It started as a live show at M-Bar, and then it moved to UCB. All of this is in LA, and it was a radio show for a period of time, and just kind of on a whim, they taped the radio show and put it out as a podcast, and that's kind of how it began. Of course, it was Comedy Death Ray back in the day, and now it's Comedy Bang Bang, and it's been growing ever since its old M-Bar days. Number 4, and this is, I think, the crux of why CBB fits my approach to what I like about stand-up so much and what I like about comedy so much, and that's, I can kind of boil down to one simple principle, and that is they really don't overdo the yes and. And I think the yes and too much is where comedy can feel a little culty in terms of improv, and comedy can just feel a little too smiley. And I think if you're the type of person that has a sort of distrust of groups and of group think, it can be a little not your cup of tea. But Comedy Bang Bang kind of skirts all of that because they often get in the way of their own improvisers, and they break some rules of improv, and because it's a safe enough space and it's an inviting enough community, it doesn't actually ruin the show. In fact, it makes the show better. It's kind of that old artist cliche where, yes, you have to learn all the rules, but the best artists are often the ones breaking them, and I see Comedy Bang Bang as like a really ripe example of that. And I think improv in general understands this, but I think Comedy Bang Bang is a really distilled version of sometimes the funniest is getting in each other's way, is watching your scene partner make a small mistake and jumping on that and kind of like ridiculing them. Maybe it's because I have big brothers and maybe I have a more antagonistic sense of humor than others, but that's definitely an element in all of this. So let's talk about yes and for a second. If you have just a passing knowledge of improv, you've probably heard that term. The idea is I'm going to say yes to what you're saying, yes, and I'm going to build upon it. So it's a great principle for building a scene together or establishing realities and characters together. However, that doesn't mean that if you have established characters, you can't disagree. There's a difference between someone just being an uncooperative improviser and a character disagreeing with another character or person in the scene. It's not exactly no but as an alternative to yes and, but there is sort of, and Scott has said this himself, this sort of, wait, hold on a minute, what did you just say? Let's focus on this. There's a lot of characters that come on and they have one thing that they want to talk about and one thing that they've prepped, but they misspeak or they say something in the beginning and the show just takes a left turn and follows this down a weird path, and it really shows how incredible some of these improvisers are, willing to totally drop the premise that they had in their pocket and go on this weird adventure. Will Hines comes to mind as someone who just does an incredible job of that. There was an episode that came out in October where he said initiation instead of orientation when he was talking about a college program, and they would not let him move past that, and then it created this whole improv scene about a college initiation that involved hoods and oak leaves and this underground society. So you gotta be willing to roll with it, which is, pretty central to improv and a lot of the fun.
Every year at the initiation, they would go over the naming scheme and what Johns Hopkins meant. They would correct people if they said
Talk us through this medical school initiation.
Yeah, it was initiation.
That sounds intense.
Yeah,
because it sounds like orientation, but a little.
No, it's not an orientation. It's an initiation. They bring you below ground.
Scary.
Blindfold you.
A lot of the show's central appeal is that it is sort of the opposite of the standard talk show format. Like on late night TV, it's so frustrating when you see the host say, now, I heard recently that you went on a blah, blah, blah kind of adventure. And then they just tell a 5-minute story that their agent sent in advance and they just deliver these lines. It just is gross. And in Comedy Bang Bang, they're not feeding them. They're kind of, as I said, impeding them. It's this like gonzo, fast and loose and sort of wrong improv style. And I think that maybe speaks to the rebel in me that likes stand-up more than improv. They won me back by doing it wrong. I think that the yes and principle is there to protect improvisers. It's there so that you are not left high and dry. It's there so that you're not going to get steamrolled. It's a good remembrance of your team. But I think if you're really good friends, if you're a good improviser, And if you're like ready for anything, especially that kind of sensibility that you see on Comedy Bang Bang, you know how to handle it when you're put on the spot and you're there with your friends. So you're not as like defensive as you might be if you were just put on a random team. Number five about Comedy Bang Bang is that there's still room for silly and still room to play. Unlike a lot of other shows, they're not really married to the format. Like Bob Duca, the character, can come on and read a list of his ailments, or Harris Whittles could come on and do Harris's Foam Corner. Paul Rust could come in and do New No-Nos. The show and Scott was very willing to let the show be what it needed to be and let the show change shape in order to better fit the performers that were coming on. I mean, I think the best modern example of that on Comedy Bang Bang is the Solo Bolo episodes with Ben Schwartz. It's just one guy. The normal format is, you know, half an hour of an interview of a real person, and then knock, 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 someone's at the door, it's a character, they come in, and then it goes off the rails and becomes very silly. But with Ben Schwartz, just the two of them, it completely breaks format, and it's the better for it. It's a show that's really open to change, which you just don't see very often when shows get this big and there's that much money and that much like resting on it. Normally you can see it just kind of slip, but Comedy Bang Bang is still really willing to be what it needs to be for its performers. You can tell how much fun they're having, and that is, I think, such a big part in experiencing comedy. And it can be tacky when, you know, they break on SNL or something. It doesn't always feel genuine, but when it does, it's so magical, right? I think one of the hallmarks of Comedy Bang Bang is when you hear that laughter that's like a little bit off mic and you know how much of a fun time they're having. I think one of my favorite like videos to watch in the universe is Nick Weiger singing his Monster song and just watching a room full of 20 of the funniest people just dying hysterically laughing. It brings me such joy seeing them having such joy. Like, it's such a magical space. And I think all of this really comes back to what they call their kind of open door policy. That door is gonna knock and you don't really know who's gonna be on the other side of it, and you have to be kind of willing to roll. And that's, you know, a lot of what improv is like, it's coming, let's do it, let's be ready. And that's something that, you know, stand-up you don't always get to experience. Improv is really, really good at being right now, right here, what's gonna make this special, why are we doing this, let's make it count, you know? It's so much more singular. Number six is a simple one. It's just about the people. It is a great example of a show that is able to bring back the characters that you love and the comedians that you love. They build lore, and they have this huge complicated canon attached to it, and they have these people that you love and you can't wait for. But on the other side, they also are always constantly bringing in people that you haven't heard of, people that I haven't heard of, people that deserve a little bit of a break, and it's a great opportunity to do that. And both of those things are treated with equal weight. Obviously, more people are probably going to listen to the episodes with Jason Mantzoukas and Paul F. Tompkins and Andy Daly, like Lauren Lapkus, but there's still time for new performers and for people that you haven't heard of, and then you just find this whole community of mainly UCB, of course, but still within that community there's all of this wonderful like diversity and inclusion and different styles of comedy and different approaches. The show is so wonderful about being different things to different people, right? So you have these comedians who come on and do characters, but you don't want to do characters, you don't feel comfortable doing characters, that's not who you are, that's fine. You can come on too, and you can just be in the first half. You can be one of the celebrities that comes on, and then someone else comes in character, and you can be there with Scott as a real person, asking the character questions and building that world with them, but you're not on the spot, you know. John Hamm is someone who's usually pretty funny and comes on the show, and he's super famous, and he doesn't want to do characters, so he doesn't. Jason Mantzoukas, also one of the funniest people in the world, doesn't really do characters, so they just come and like chat. Although, let's be honest, I feel like Jason Mantzoukas is like a character of himself anyway. I have no idea who the real Jason Mantzoukas is, and that probably makes me love him more. But the show suits different types of people, different types of comedy. It's still a home for all of that. Whatever you need, you're gonna be able to find it there. And if you're super cool like Ben Schwartz, you can just completely break the format. The other part of this too is that they're not a slave to making sense. Like, yes, there's canon, and yes, there's a very meticulously kept wiki that I highly recommend that you explore. And the fans of this show do incredible work there, but they're still willing to throw things on their head. They're still willing to kind of do whatever they feel like is the best choice in that moment. That's badass. And as I said before, for someone like me that's used to stand-up, this silliness is just so refreshing. If you're looking for stand-up that kind of feels like improv, I could definitely point you towards Rory Scovel, James Adomian. James Acaster is a great example. He'll be up there and he'll say things like, oh, I just love being an undercover cop. It's so great. And you're like, wait, what? And of course it's nonsense. But it's this beautiful signifier of like, oh, we're just here to play. There's no pretense that it's going to be real. And I think that's an incredible choice. There really should be more shows built like Comedy Bang Bang. I don't know why there aren't, because it's a great format. Which actually brings me to number 7, my last point here today, which is what the podcast has become. Now, because it's such a great home for comedians to come on and kind of workshop characters, it's been a place where lots of beloved characters have originated. And then they go off and they do different things. Like there's so many spin-off children podcasts of Comedy Bang Bang, whether it's Womp It Up or Questions with Lennon or the Gino Lombardo Show. I think Affirmation Nation is also, I think that's the Bob Duca one. Questions with Lennon, I think, is the closest to the actual format, where it's a Questions with Lennon is a weird show because it is a character hosting it, and sometimes characters come on and are interviewed, and sometimes real people come on and are interviewed. And so the show can vary so drastically from episode to episode. One of my favorite podcast episodes of all time is an episode of Questions with Lennon where Mike Mitchell of Doughboys, comes on and he does an impression of Larry Bird. He plays basketball player Larry Bird, and Mike Hanford is doing John Lennon. And it's kind of clear that like these are two of the voices that these two performers just can do. And I love that there's no question of like, why are John Lennon and Larry Bird hanging out? Like, it doesn't matter. There's just an hour and a half of these two men chatting, and it's magic and random and beautiful. But beyond all of the sub-podcasts, all of our sub-podcasts.
I love all of our sub-podcasts. So.
Yeah. Who's Oliver sub-podcasts?
It's grown into this like huge earwolf monster. It has its own platform even with Stitcher Premium. And beyond that, like, it was a TV show on IFC for over 100 episodes, which is wild. Especially as someone who didn't really watch the TV show, I was like, oh my god, they made 100 of those? Damn. And they go on these sold-out tours. It's so fascinating that no one really knows who Scott Aukerman is, but he's like selling out tours nationwide. That's such a weird... I bet that's a weird level of fame for him to feel. That's very odd. Really hoping that the podcast industry can continue to be what it is now. I think it's still figuring out how it wants to make money, what those revenue streams are, because yeah, you can put things behind a paywall. Every episode, I think more than 6 months old of Comedy Bang Bang is behind the Stitcher paywall, even though they're all on YouTube or whatever. Of course, ads and things like that, and live shows, and of course having a podcast if you're a comedian makes more easy for fans to find you and love you, and then they'll show up to your shows, so that's kind of like a indirect revenue stream. But I really hope that it's able to stay this like beautiful, weird, unregulated kind of space, because I'd be so sad to miss that. Already I'm annoyed by the amount of celebrities who have podcasts. Like, this isn't a space for you. This is a space for... Now I'm gonna get on my soapbox, but I think podcasts should stay like lo-fi and chill. I don't really even listen to My Favorite Murder as much anymore because it's too big. Oh, am I just a hipster? Is that really the problem here? Possibly. Comedy Bang Bang can seem really daunting. There's so much in-universe like lore and stuff, and it can be hard to find an entry point. So I'm going to put down below some links to some episodes that I think would be a good starting point if you're new to the show. If you're new to Comedy Bang Bang and you watch this whole video, like, you're awesome. But I'm going to put that down below for any newbies. Who are your favorite Comedy Bang Bang characters? Let me know down below. I was going to compile mine, but it just, the list got too unwieldy. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. If you have things that you want me to talk about in the comedy world, write that down below. And I'm excited for this new year in general, for the channel. I have a lot of things that I'm excited to talk about, and I think hoping I can fall into a more predictable schedule for this year. We'll see what happens. Okay, thanks. Bye. Bye.